says, I'm well. Ophelia says, I have these letters that you wrote me and I want to give them back to you. And Hamlet says, no, I never gave you any letters. And Ophelia says, yes, you did. You gave me these really sweet romantic letters, but they've lost their perfume. They're not sweet anymore because our relationship has ended. And Hamlet sort of changes the topic and says, are you honest? So here he says, are you honest? And Ophelia's like, what? And Hamlet says, are you fair? Are you beautiful? And Ophelia's like, what are you going on about? What means your lordship? And Hamlet says, if you be honest and fair, your honesty should admit no discourse to your beauty. So he's saying if you happen to be both honest and beautiful, you need to make sure that you don't admit that you're beautiful because you're honest. And Ophelia kind of reacts to that and says, but isn't it right for beauty and honesty to go together? Because a beautiful exterior would match a beautiful soul. So an honest soul should have a beautiful exterior. And Hamlet explains his logic here. So his logic is that the power of beauty will sooner transform honesty from what it is to a bawd than the force of honesty can translate beauty into his likeness. So he's saying that physical beauty has the power of corruption. So he's saying that if you are beautiful, it will transform the honesty that you have inside you to a sort of lechery or, I guess, sluttiness. Whereas if you are honest, you can't become beautiful as a result. You could be the most honest person in the world and it's not going to make you attractive. So you can see there again his preoccupation with the idea that appearances should match their insides. And again, that idea of corruption, that idea that beauty can corrupt, comes through as well. And then he says, I used to love you. And Ophelia said, yes, I thought you used to love me. And Hamlet said, well, you should never have believed me when I said it, for virtue cannot so inoculate our old stock, but we shall relish of it. So this is another reference to corruption. So inoculation is like a vaccination. So it's when you're preventing yourself from getting a disease. So if you imagine that the disease that he's talking about is sort of lying and dishonesty, he's saying, well, if you are honest, you inject your honesty into me to inoculate me against corruption, but the reality is that the old stock, the blood that people are born with, is inherently corrupt. People are born corrupt, so it doesn't matter if you meet someone who is virtuous because they're not going to be able to stop you from something that you've already got. And then he says, I loved you not, and Ophelia says, well, you tricked me. And then Hamlet gets a little bit angry. This is another one of the more famous speeches from the play. He says, get thee to a nunnery. Why wouldst thou be a breeder of sinners? So some people see this get thee to a nunnery speech as being Hamlet telling Ophelia, to seclude herself and that she's a loser. But it's not. It's not at all. This speech is him saying, you should never get married. Don't ever get married. So when he says get thee to a nunnery, he means that for someone in her social position, her two options are to become a nun or to get married. And he's saying she should go to a nunnery rather than get married. And he says, why would you be a breeder of sinners? If you have children, then you're going to end up breeding sinners because all men are sinners. And then he says, I am myself indifferent honest. I'm not such a bad person. But yet I could accuse me of such things that it were better my mother had not borne me. So he says, but even though I'm not that bad, I've still done things that I should really never have been born. And he says, I'm proud, I'm revengeful, I'm ambitious, I've got more offences at my beck than I have thoughts to put them in, so I could commit so many more offences if I felt like it, if I had time to think about them. So he's outlined basically that he thinks all men are inherently corrupt, that he thinks that no matter how virtuous other people are, like women are, they can't fix men, that men are going to continue to be corrupt. And then he says, what should such fellows as I do, crawling between heaven and earth and heaven? So he's described life as being crawling around. So you can see he's really disparaging about what the meaning of our existence is, because he sees it as being just crawling around. And the question itself is sort of highlighting the concept of meaninglessness. And then he says, we are arrant knaves all, believe none of us. So he's talking about men, and he just says that they're all liars. So what's the point of my existence? What's the point of any existence? Then he says, go thy ways to a nunnery. And then he changes the topic, where's your father? Some commentators take that question, where's your father, to mean that he has actually seen Polonius and that he's aware that Polonius is listening in on this conversation. Especially because Ophelia says that Polonius is at home, and Hamlet says, yeah, well, you should lock him in there so that at least if whatever happens to him, it's only going to happen to him in his own house. And then he says goodbye, and Ophelia, prays for him, and Hamlet gives one more speech before he actually finally goes. And he says, actually, if you do marry, I'll give you this as your dowry. He says, be thou as chaste as ice, as pure as snow, thou shalt not escape calumny. So it doesn't matter how sweet and innocent you might be now, you will be a sinner after you're married. And then he says, get thee to a nunnery, go farewell. So don't get married. And then he says, or if thou wilt needs marry, if you have to marry a fool. For wise men know well enough what monsters you make of them. So he says, if you have to marry, make sure you marry someone who's dumb enough not to notice when you cheat on him. And then he says, to a nunnery, go and quickly to farewell. So it's pretty clear from this that he is treating Ophelia badly and acting as though all women are untrustworthy as a result of the actions that Gertrude has taken by remarrying Claudius so quickly. Okay, Ophelia prays again, O heavenly powers, restore him. And Hamlet keeps going. He says, I have heard of your paintings too, well enough. So this is another reference to makeup. He says, God has given you one face and you make yourselves another. So that's a nice reference to the concept of false appearances and deceit. That is one of the main themes of the play. So he's basically saying, look, women wear makeup in order to hide their true faces, their true nature. You jig, you amble, and you lisp and nickname God's creatures and make your wantonness your ignorance. So he's just saying that women are like devils. Then he says, go to, I'll have no more of it. It has made me mad. I say we will have no more marriages. So he's saying if I was in charge, if I were king, I would outlaw marriage. Those that are married already, all but one shall live. So he's saying, look, if you're already married, I'd let you keep the marriage, all but one, referring to Claudius and Gertrude, because if he were king, he would definitely have killed Claudius by now. And he says, the rest shall keep as they are. So anyone who's not already married would have to stay single. And then he says, to a nunnery go. And he leaves. And Ophelia is left kind of shaken and upset. And she says, oh, what a noble mind is here overthrown. The courtiers, soldiers, scholars, eye, tongue, sword, the expectancy and rose of the fair state, the glass of fashion and the mould of form, the observed of all observers, quite down. So she's just saying, look, Hamlet used to be so noble and so amazing. He was a courtier, a soldier, and a scholar. He was the whole hope for Denmark's future. And now look at him. And she says, I of ladies most deject and wretched that sucked the honey of his music vows. So she's like, I'm completely miserable because I was stupid enough to believe his promises. Now see that noble and most sovereign reason like sweet bells jangled, out of tune and harsh, that unmatched form and feature of blown youth blasted with ecstasy. Oh, woe is me to have seen what I have seen, now see what I see. So she's saying, I believed his promises. I saw all the potential in him for the future, and it is heartbreaking to see him so destroyed and so low. So then Claudius and Polonius come back in. Don't forget they've been listening to everything. And Claudius says, love, his affections do not that way tend, nor what he spake, though it lacked form a little, was not like madness. So he says he's not mad with love. He's kind of angry and upset, but nothing that he said was actually mad. Then he says, there's something in his soul over which his melancholy sits on brood, and I do doubt the hatch and the disclose will be some danger. So he's using a chicken metaphor here, an egg metaphor. So he's saying that Hamlet's got some idea in his head and it's upsetting him. And at the moment, he's just like sitting on that idea like a chicken sitting on an egg. He's brooding over it and concerned, and he's just focused on it completely. And then he says, the hatch and the disclose, so when that idea hatches like an egg, it's going to be really dangerous, it's going to be frightening. And he says, for which to prevent, I have in quick determination thus set it down. So I've got an idea, I'm going to stop this egg from hatching, I'm going to prevent the danger of Hamlet acting as a result of what he's thinking about. He shall with speed to England for the demand of our neglected tribute. Haply the seas and countries different with variable object shall expel this something settled matter in his heart. So to prevent this, I've just decided that I'm going to send him to England as quickly as possible as an ambassador, and this will distract him. Whereon his brains still beating puts him thus from fashion of himself. And then once he's distracted, he'll return to normal. And then he says to Polonius, what think you on it? What do you think? And Polonius says, yeah, it shall do well, but yet I do believe that origin and commencement of his grief sprung from neglected love. So he's like, yeah, look, it's a good plan, but I still think that he's mad with love. And then Polonius says, how now, Ophelia? You need not tell us what Lord Hamlet said, we heard it all. So, hey, Ophelia, we heard everything. And then he says to Claudius again, my lord, do as you please, but if you hold it fit, after the play let his queen mother all alone entreat him to show his grief, let her be round with him, and I'll be placed, so please you, in the ear of all their conference. So he's saying, I'd like to try this again. Is it okay with you if Gertrude talks to Hamlet alone after we watch the play, and then I'll hide and listen to the conversation? And then Polonius ends by saying, look, if you find him not, to England send him, or confine him where your wisdom best shall think. So look, if me eavesdropping on this conversation doesn't prove that he is actually mad with love, then you can send him to England. And Claudius says, it shall be so. Like, yeah, okay, we'll act out your plan first. But then he says, madness in great ones must not unwatched go. So he's saying, look, it is dangerous to have Hamlet running around like this. We've got to do something before he acts, because when he acts, it's going to be dangerous. And that is Act 3, Scene 1.